Well, those of you who were able to join us this morning, appreciate the time. Um, Hopefully you get something out of the webinar today. If you're unfamiliar with workflow, if you're well acquainted with workflow, either way, hopefully this will give you maybe a new perspective and new ideas on how to apply it to what you're doing in your Altiris environment. The goal of the webinar today is to show you some of the what I think is a pretty tremendous automation potential of the workflow solution, and in this case, as it can be applied to your patch management solution, is we don't want to be doing all the manual day-to-day things that come along with a lot of what patch management is, and especially if, like the customer that we built this for initially, that customer had a pretty sprawling multi-domained enterprise. So it wasn't just a single Altiris administrator that was doing patch management. It was several, and it was just a lot of work that customer wanted to get automated instead of having all those hands-on each time a patch was made available. So we converted what was as I said, the multi-domain enterprise converted to a zero-touch automated workflow routine. And that being said, this presentation, as as few people as we have on live here, we'd like to make it interactive. So if you have any questions as we're going on, you can just pop in with those if you got a short question, or we can just wait till the end and just write that down beside you, and we'll take care of that toward the end if you'd like. As far as who you have on the line, you've got myself, and maybe Paul will be back in time to give an introduction there for himself.
Yeah, sure, I'm back, Andrew.
Okay.
Thank you.
Paul, why don't you introduce yourself there?
Yep, thanks. Andrew and I are both on the professional services team at Intuitive. My main area of focus is asset management and the platform. So typically on engagements, after I've implemented asset management and we've got it up and running and those manual processes all working correctly, Andrew will come in a little bit later as the asset management program matures, and he will automate those processes where we can. And the same can be said, obviously, around patch management for today and other pieces of the Symantec management platform and Altiris.
Okay. So a lot of times what workflow ends up being is an enhancement to existing services. So if we have a guy come in and implement client management or as Paul was mentioning, asset management, or sometimes even it doesn't necessarily need to extend from other services or other solutions. It can be completely custom from the ground up. And that being said, I've been working in workflow development for a little over 9 years now, and I am on the trusted advisor team with Symantec for the workflow and, of course, service desk products. As far as Intuitive goes, we are a national Symantec partner, and we are focused on the endpoint management space in the industry. We have a very, very talented and very strong services group, of which Paul and I are just a part. And we are one of the original Altiris partners going back to the late 90s. Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about what is Symantec workflow. So we're just going to give a very brief overview of what workflow is and does. We're going to talk about why automate patch management and in that section, we'll talk about the brief case study with the customer I'd mentioned earlier. And then we'll talk about the patch management automation itself, what that project looks like, the steps that are taken, and how we get new patches that are discovered all the way through to production distribution. And finally, at the end, we'll talk about the administrative portal and what that term means as it applies to this workflow. Okay, so as far as Symantec workflow goes, like I'd mentioned before, I'm not sure what the audience here is, whether we have old hands or maybe some of you have never heard of workflow, you don't know what it does. So given that, we'll keep this a little brief as far as what the product itself does, and we'll move past that in a moment to the actual process itself. But that preamble aside, let's cover the very basics of what workflow is and does. The solution itself, to put it in Symantec's words, is a visual, component-based, and data-driven automation tool. And that tool is used to create automated processes that link together disparate people, processes, technology, data, data sources, etc. Now, what that means to us is that we are able to tie together business processes that are otherwise distinct, compartmentalized, and separate. And those processes may be currently without any sort of routine or framework or repeatable templates or motions. So we will, with workflow, we can convert those into automated processes. And as those are converted and made into workflow processes, we can also provide an interface, a web interface to those. And through that interface, we provide access to the underlying data via custom designed web pages. And those web pages can be designed really to spec. So however deep or shallow we want to go with designing the front end, we can do that. Integration points include inbound, outbound web service calls, database interaction, and that many types of the major database technologies. Flat file parsing. So if we want to take a flat file like a text file or a CSV, XML, we can parse those files and get the data we need. Active Directory transactions, as well as custom coding. So if we want to build, if you have someone on the team that can build custom C# code, .NET code, you can do that, and that code component will work in your project. Okay. So let's talk about, as far as workflow goes, you can build the modular reusable routines. So we're not building code from scratch. We're building design canvas. So the components themselves have code on the back end that is compiled at runtime. We don't have to sit and type out C# code, although we can. We don't have to, and we can build that into modular reusable components. So that if we build one good model, we can reuse that over and over again with different input parameters and have different results and different effects. And this lends not only to efficiency but to rapid development times. So we really shorten the time to live by leveraging the modular design capabilities that workflow offers. So as I mentioned, it is a graphical process development framework. So that being said, we're not digging through code. We're not looking through someone else's scripts and hoping to piece together what it is that they've built. Workflow itself is very easily self-documented. As you can see on the slide here, you know, you can put annotations in the workflow. You can rename all of the components so that we know what each component is doing. So really what the workflow canvas ends up being is a fully functional, almost a Visio diagram that's actually doing something. I'd mentioned the HTML front end, and what that's going to do is we're going to be able to leverage HTML, CSS, JavaScript to, you know, not only present the data and interact with the data, but we also can present that in a professional and well-designed way. So we can consider, you know, user experience, user interface, you know, keep the pages lean to the point, make it, you know, single click if possible, that sort of thing. Because what we don't want is, you know, a sprawling front end with tons of fields and tons of things that don't necessarily have to be there in every condition, every situation, because that starts to turn users off. They don't really want to use this sprawling, you know, mess of a front end. So we can really design that to suit. Auditing, logging, code debugging. So it's very easy to audit every step of the way. So if we wanted to save every component to a database log, or just use the built-in workflow logs, we can do that. We can see every step of the way what's happened, what's occurred, and where any issues might have occurred. So you can see here in the slideshow example, if there is an exception that happens, we can watch that at debug time, and we can get real-time runtime data, and it makes for very easy troubleshooting and research. Okay, so that's workflow in a very brief and small nutshell, which doesn't quite do it justice considering the power and the expansiveness of the product. But let's move on to patch management as it applies to workflow. So why do we want to automate patch management? So anybody who is familiar with patch management as a process knows that it can be a bit of a heartache that comes with every, you know, Patch Tuesday release. You got to check the newly available bulletins. You have to review compliance reports, stage the bulletins, build policies, repeat until you have everything covered and everything is distributed or at least assessed. Automation of these steps means that on Patch Tuesday or 0 day, any day, if that's, you know, how it applies, the newest bulletins are automatically discovered by the automation processes and are brought to production maturity with no manual interaction necessary. So automation also means that when the security team asks, you know, how are we doing on this latest, you know, meltdown or whatever, you know, it is that everyone in the industry is talking about, instead of scrambling to get those numbers, or maybe, you know, oops, we haven't done the patch yet, and, you know, scrambling to get that patch out and then get some numbers, the answer can simply be, you know, automation's already taken care of it. We're already watching the compliance numbers rise. You know, day one, automation staged, built a policy for it, and started distribution and testing. So in that regard, the customer that initially approached us with this idea was interested in the bullet points that we see here. So wanted to streamline and improve their patch management process overall, as well as be able to respond to requests for status, as I mentioned a bit ago, on certain patches and in a timely and positive manner, instead of, you know, like I mentioned, saying, well, we haven't seen that one yet, but we'll go take a look. That's the last thing you want to tell, you know, the security team in this case. Additionally, and I guess as self-serving as it sounds, this particular customer really appreciated and wanted to derive the value of workflow as an automation tool to upper management. this was in an effort to secure further funding for additional automation, and from there, additional time and cost savings. So, and this has certainly done that in their environment. It's made workflow very visible and I guess appreciated tool in that customer's environment. Okay, that said, we'll move on to the solution and how that looks in the workflow platform, and how we got that from manual to automated. So first thing to tackle was discovery and data capture. So leveraging custom database table, the project itself flattens and then saves the patch data from the Symantec database in order to facilitate and better tolerate frequent queries. We don't want to be hitting the Symantec database with these complex queries as often as we really want to check for new bulletins. So typically the project would check every 3 hours or so to refresh the custom patch data table. That way, the very longest we have to wait for new patches to begin being distributed and staged is 3 hours. We also update bulletin supersedence in this to ensure we have the freshest patch data, and we're only targeting bulletins that need to be applied. Target counts such as installed, vulnerable, and applicable. We're grabbing compliance metrics and product information used to structure the folder hierarchy, and we'll take a look at that in a bit. Okay, so after we've gathered the data, the platform and the routines are going to assess that data. Each bulletin is put through a series of evaluations and determinations, I guess, which concludes either with the discarding of a bulletin as not applicable. That means, as I've mentioned, perhaps it's superseded or has no applicable targets, or the process will queue the bulletin for further actions such as staging or policy building. Upon discovering this, the new bulletin batches, so if a Patch Tuesday occurs and there's a new batch of bulletins made available, notification is sent to the administration group in order to make them aware that, hey, we've got a new patch cycle that's now underway, and here is a list of all the patches, all the bulletins, and we can include a brief description of the bulletins, what sort of software it's going to touch, and that sort of thing. So after assessment has completed, we're going to take the bulletins that need to be applied to the environment, and we're going to go ahead and begin to stage those bulletins for distribution. So, for example, if a bulletin is found to have applicable targets and is not superseded, the staging process will be run against that bulletin, meaning that it will attempt to download, and if successful, it will continue to the next steps. If a download just happens to fail because there's maybe a firewall rule that's blocking a specific website, or maybe something just failed with the hardware or the network stack at the time, it will be marked, flagged in the database, and the administrative group will be notified of that failure. The automation can then continue on to the next bulletin for processing. And we'll talk about recovery of those failed bulletins here in a moment. So after we have staged a bulletin, we're going to build the policy and curate and maintain the structure, folder structure of those policies. So after it's downloaded, it's flagged for policy creation. And in order to keep the structure readable and user-friendly, as you can see on the right-hand side there, I've got a screenshot of what that looks like. That's the automated system has built this folder structure. That model, that folder creation model, is used to maintain this folder structure that you see here. If it's already found, the folder's already found, the policy will be created and dropped right in. If it's not found, it will be created The policy is then created and then moved into that folder. So really what we want to do is we want to make it easy that if someone does have to come in and review policies, it'll be easy enough to find those because we've structured it in a user-friendly format. Okay, so after our policy is created, I guess I should say when the policy is first created, in this case, it is targeting the first pilot group. So we have one test group and then another test group and then out to production it goes. So when the policy is created at creation time, it is told to target the first test group. From then on, the scheduling model is going to reference the data that an administrator has set up in the scheduling configuration admin portal page that you see screenshot here on the right. So all of this information is curated by an administrator. It could be that it's never going to change when this workflow is created and published for the first time. The administrator comes in, sets those values, and then forgets about it, never has to come back again. But if we do need to change those groups or change the duration of a patch period or a testing period, it's very easy to come in and change that milestone. Okay, so upon each milestone, I guess milestone satisfaction, notifications are sent to the administration team. So once the initial test period is complete, a notification is sent saying, this batch of bulletins, here's the list, is now progressing on to the next test phase. Keeps the administrators aware of where these patches are. Makes it easier to troubleshoot if someone asks, hey, are you guys doing patching? My computer's acting funny. Well, they just received a notification saying that this is pushed out. So yeah, maybe. So that's the idea. And then finally, when that's pushed all the way out to production, a notification sent saying, here's the list of everything that is now pushed out to the entire environment. We can even include compliance numbers in that email if we wanted to. Okay. So let's move on to the administration portal and how, from a web front end, we're allowing the administrators of the patch process, whose jobs just got a lot easier, by the way, because all they need to do now is just go in and curate a couple of different variables and very easy functions, and that's just what they want to do, because a lot of this data we're notifying them along the way. So what the administration portal is intended for in any workflow project is to allow an administrator to make changes to the data that's being input into the workflow without actually having to open the workflow and make changes to, or I guess make changes inside of an environment that may not be familiar with them. So they may not know how to make changes and republish a workflow. Well, you don't have to if we have an administration portal front end, as we just we expose those variables and those input values so that they can make changes and it will affect the project at runtime. So we'll take a quick look at how that's going to work. So this is just a quick example of what this is going to look like. Now this was built to suit the customer in question, and some menu items may not be required if we were to implement this in another environment, whereas it may be deemed that others need to be added, which aren't seen in this illustration. New fields can be added on certain pages, fields can be taken away, entire menu items can be taken away, and also we can adjust or build security scoping around how is someone logging in and what they can see based on how they logged in. The portal and its functionality can be fully and deeply customized to fit any situation as needed. Okay, so first piece of this particular implementation is the dashboards. And what these dashboards are intended to do is just provide a very quick look into how automation is doing and what compliance looks like for that. So again, this is tailor-made and can be changed in any way that a customer can imagine. In this case, we have a very easily searchable bulletin list, and when you click on any bulletin in that list, you can see just a short graph and compliance review, so you can get a general idea of how we're looking on patching that particular bulletin. There's also a disabled policies menu item. So there are some cases where there may be certain policies or certain bulletins that we don't want to have automated. Using a configurable, I guess an exclusions model, we can build in logic to still create those policies, still download the bulletins, but create that policy in a disabled state. And from there, an administrator can come in, use this menu item, and either enable the policy when they're ready, or create a ticket based on, maybe we need to test this first, maybe we need to create a change management process, etc. Okay, I'd mentioned earlier that we would be able to handle defective policies after the fact. So if there's something that goes wrong with staging or with policy building, we can review the issues and take action on those. So maybe we want to take a quick look at the Altiris console, find out what went wrong, get that fixed, and then queue this for retry. So it's just a one button press, then it queues it and retries again. Or if there's an issue with some other platform or solution in the environment that's preventing this from working, we can create a ticket for that right here from the admin portal. Okay, automation logs. So this is going to show us, I guess, a quick review of what automation looks like as far as what data is being gathered, how that data is moving along. If they want to take a look at a specific bulletin, they can do that and find out where in the process this bulletin is. If 20 bulletins are found on a certain day, and we drop into the automation logs menu, we'll see that it has not only discovered those, but it's begun processing. So you can watch that processing happen. Just refresh the page, and you can see check marks starting to get filled. You can see timestamps being updated. If there's a fault, you can see that there's a fault that's occurred, etc. So just a peek into what's going on behind the scenes in automation. We're also keeping track of process metrics, so we can illustrate the effectiveness and time savings of the solution. So again, this can be custom built. So if we wanted to include additional data, if we wanted to look at different metrics, then we could do that. Okay, and then how do we deal with artifacts? So there was a directive from the customer that, hey, if we have old patches that are no longer needed, can we clean those up? Can we automate the cleanup of those? So the answer was yes, we can. And when we implemented that, I think it took it was a little more automation than the customer was ready for. So what I guess the compromise was that let's put it in a dashboard or in an admin menu module, and then let us go down and just start clicking the ones that we want to remove. So basically, you click the bulletin, you say, I no longer want this, and it's going to remove files that are no longer needed, so downloaded bulletin files, as well as clean up policies in the policy hierarchy or the policy form in the console itself. Okay, and finally, the administration module is intended to allow a very broad and I guess powerful control over the process itself. You can see right there at the top is the power switch. It's exactly what it sounds like. If you toggle it off and save that value, the automation platform no longer runs. This can be useful during situations like maybe a change freeze or an extended holiday if you want to turn that off while everybody's gone. Just under that, we have manual initialization. Sometimes if the workflow server itself gets patched and after a restart, the workflow doesn't initialize as expected, the automated and scheduled processes aren't running, you can click this button and it'll kick that off, kind of jumpstart it again. Retrofit previously created policies. So anybody who's done patch management in Altiris, unless it's been a single person doing it for years, or you have some sort of template that everyone has to adhere to, you're going to have a mess in your policy farm. So in the console, you've got names that aren't of the same format. You've got maybe 3 different Microsoft folders. So what this is intended to do is clean up those old policies, clean up the folder structure, and convert these to the automated template. So there is a bit of addition to the XML that marks these as workflow automated creation so that we can work with those and ignore anything that's created manually. So that's what the retrofit does. Let's move on to schedules and targets right there at the bottom. We'll just go over that really quick, and then we'll open it up. So as far as schedules goes, this particular customer had the need for 2 test phases and then release to production. So what that's going to look like as far as data setup goes is all we need is to find the filter GUID for each target. So test 1 target may be a small part of the desktop group that has been put together, and they're the test or the guinea pig. So drop that GUID in, say how long you want that duration to go, 7 days. Test phase 2, here's the test group, there's their filter GUID for that target. So after that 7 days, the initial 7 days, the workflow that's responsible for scheduling will find the next test target and apply that test target to the bulletin that we're running through that particular process at the time, thus advancing and progressing that bulletin to the next stage. And then after 7 days, again in this example, we're going to release that out to production. Now, at any time during this, any bulletin can be have its automation disabled. So if there's a problem with a bulletin, or there's maybe just some discussion that hasn't quite finished, and we're not ready to push that out to the next test group, or we're not ready to push that out to production, it can be paused, or it can be disabled altogether. Okay, so that's what I have today as far as what the automation looks like for patch management implementation. Everybody kind of does patch management their own way, a little differently. They have their own business process around it. So this may not be something that we can just pick up and drop into any environment. However, with using the workflow tool, what we have is a very powerful template that can be very quickly adjusted to suit any other environment, especially since the basis of this is the Altiris patch management module. Paul, I'll push it back over to you, and we can go from there.
Great, thank you, and thank you very much, Andrew. That was a very informative overview of the patching process using workflow. I really appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to put everyone on unmute here and open the floor up to questions and feedback. So if anyone has any questions or comments for Andrew, the floor is open.
Hey, Andrew, this is Matt. Quick question about the Altiris token. I've never used that. Does the workflow run under the credentials of the person who set it up, or do you usually use a service account?
Typically, I'll use a service account for running this so that we don't run into any unexpected issues. And I'll lock down the front end so that if, for example, a user tries to access maybe a URL that they were accidentally copied on in an email somewhere, it's going to read those credentials, and it'll just route them over to I'm sorry, you're not authorized to view this page.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, hopefully?
Yeah, definitely.
Probably something you're familiar with as well then, as far as that concept goes.
Yeah, only concept.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions for Andrew? If not, I think we can give you back about 45 minutes of your day here. Okay. Well, it sounds like we don't have any other questions from the group. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free. You have our email address. At least I think you have my email address, and I will be sure to forward that along. I'd like to, with that, thank everyone for their time this morning, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.